Take control of the numbers and supercharge your small business with Xero. That's Xero. With our easy-to-use accounting software with automation and reporting features, you'll spend less time on manual tasks and more time understanding how your business is doing. 87% of surveyed U.S. customers agree Xero helps improve financial visibility. Search Xero with an X or visit xero.com/ACAST to start your 30-day free trial. Conditions apply.
Busy work weeks can leave you feeling drained. Prolon's 5-day fasting mimicking diet works at the cellular level to rejuvenate you from the inside out, providing real results that include fat-focused, sustainable weight loss with no injection needed. Next Gen builds on the original Prolon with 100% organic soups and teas, a richer taste, and ready-to-eat meals. Developed at USC's Longevity Institute and backed by top medical centers, Prolon supports biological age reduction, metabolic health, skin appearance, fat loss, and energy. Get 15% off plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe at prolonlife.com/start. That's prolonlife.com/start.
Hello and welcome to 31 Days of Terror 2025, and we are on day number 13, and I have one spooky story for you today, and our stories today come from Sybil. Listener stories have touched on repeating numbers, so this is one to add. I always saw 333, so often in fact that it freaked me out, and I said to the ether, whoever or whatever you are, you should go and see my mom because she loves shit like this. But I honestly just can't take it. And it stopped. I told my sister and she said it was a mistake to send it away because it was an angel message. Though she thought it was hilarious that I sent it to our mother. I asked it to come back and apologised, but it never really did come back. When I moved back to Canada and near my sister's city, I saw 444 all the time. And I didn't ask it to go away. I said thank you, which is what my sister said to do. Her number was 1111. We'd text photos of the numbers to each other when we saw them, and we saw our numbers a lot. After she died, and to this day, I always see combinations of our two numbers. All the time. And very rarely our individual numbers anymore. I still say thank you like my sister told me to do. So why would I send some weird number spirit to my mother, you may be asking? She is one of those old country Slavic folk who just never seemed bothered about seeing ghosts at all. I knew she could handle it, or send it away. My mother had lots of strange experiences that traumatised me just hearing about them. My mom and I would have a great long natter each weekend when I lived abroad, and we'd be lucky to see each other once a year. She moved to a newly built house on some very ancient land at the top of a small mountain, hemmed by old forests which swept down to the sea. And that land was buzzing with weirdness. For a period of time each week when I'd call, I'd hear another chapter of an ongoing saga in her very haunted brand new house. It started one night as she lay in bed reading. There was a cracking sound, somewhere between a whip snapping and a lightning strike, and an invisible force dropped through the roof, landing in the corner of the room. She wouldn't so much see it as hear it. It was two men fighting each other, wrestling, grunting and yelling. She only had on the bedside light, and in the darkness of the corner, she could barely see the mass of two men rolling around, punching each other, until she heard my long-dead father's voice say, "Okay, fine, you can go and see her." My mother was sitting up, and was completely confused about what just happened. I would have had a completely different reaction, I argue a normal reaction, but my mother was just confused and curious. Maybe like you'd be if you saw a moose in your garden. That's a bad example because there were often bears and deer in her garden. Well, the saga unfolded over the next few months as my mother was repeatedly visited by the ghost of an ex-boyfriend that she barely remembered. But clearly she had made quite the impression on him. God, it was a horrible bunch of stories. First, he would just show up and plead with her, asking if she remembered him, telling her how much he loved her. He went on and on. He gave his name first and last, and my mom scoured her memory to even remember him. My mom just shrugged it off and told him to go away each time. Then he took to asking her to come with him, begging her to come be with him in the other place, and again, my mom told him to get out and to leave her alone. One night she was reading in bed and felt something pressing down near her feet. She lowered her book to find this ghost crawling up her bed on all fours with a wide grin on his face. She said she just clicked her tongue in disapproval and lifted her book back to her face. When she described the event, I was like, "What the hell, Mom?" She said he looked like he thought it was some kind of playful, naughty move to get into bed with her, so her prevailing reaction was one of puritanic disapproval. Eventually her ability to combine neglect with disapproval came in handy and the man stopped visiting her. This reminded me of my dad's story earlier on, where the spirit had so much trouble of letting go of the woman he was in love with when he was alive, and also the indifference of the woman to that longing. My mom seems to have the same emotional range with ghosts as most of us do with a grocery store cashier who is maybe a little slow or comments on everything you've bought before she scans it. That's it. That's how deep the ghost reaction goes with her. I remember her talking to my teacher when I was probably around 8 years old. When we got to our car, she told me that my teacher had a man standing behind her smiling, wearing a military uniform. I really didn't want to hear that. Years later, we found out that she had indeed been married before her current husband, to a man in the military who had died young. When I moved back to Canada, my son and I lived in that haunted new house of my mother's for about 9 months. The house had been empty for a couple of years because my mom was living near my sister in a senior's residence a ferry ride away, but couldn't bring herself to sell the house. I said I would fix it up for her, and then she could finally sell it. We found it difficult to live there. The lights would dim and brighten, periodically stop working, and then just turn on by themselves. They were all on slide or dimmers, so you had to physically slide the switch to turn it on or change the brightness. I would be sitting and reading while I watched the lights slowly go from off to the brightest setting on their own across the room. I just ignored it. I knew it was trying to get my attention. I didn't even discuss it with anyone until after we had moved out. Plus, I could dismiss everything by telling myself the house had been empty for a couple of years, so all of it could be attributed to things that happen when a property is left vacant. Though there was something I couldn't explain. The worst part was that I tried to sleep in a particular bedroom because it had a nice big bed, but each night a darker than black shadow would spread across the ceiling and give off the most oppressive feeling. I didn't want to give in because it is important to stand your ground with spirits and assert your ownership of the space, but it felt like a pressure in my head, and I would have to fight off an anxiety attack each night. So I tried to ignore it or to get it to move on by holding space. I tried sleeping with the light on, with the door open, with the door closed. But within a month or so, I had to start sleeping in a different room. Mom never mentioned that energy, but she slept in a different room when she lived there, so maybe she avoided it. Or it's possible that the energy had a different attitude towards me than it did to her. But I think it's likely that the house being empty for so long had just allowed energies from the land to seep into the house unopposed by my mother's clicking tongue disapproval ghost banishing technique, and it had time to really settle in. I know that part of the problem with the house was coming from the land. When my son and I lived in that house, he would have to walk through the woods at the top of the street, basically where the road ended, to get to town, where he was taking a few classes at the college, which was a portable building set alongside a parking lot, which gives you an idea of how small the town was. The first part of the path was an old creek bed that caught some runoff in the spring, but was otherwise pretty dry. Deeper in the forest, the path turned away from the creek bed and became a dirt track, which was fairly nice and wide in some parts, and other parts it was narrow and full of thick tree roots to trip over. Oddly, there were a couple of long ago abandoned and burned out car chassis along the path. I have no idea how they got there, but the forest had grown up around them. When my son, who was 19 at the time, went through the forest alone, he often ran into a bear. It went something like this. He would walk into the forest, see a bear, and then take a huge detour around, refusing to use the path. I used the path often, since the only other way into town was to walk down to the highway and walk on the shoulder right next to the cars. When I walked through the forest, I would always see interesting birds and deer. I saw deer as often as he saw bears. So he would see a bear on the path, and the next time he went, I would walk him through the forest into town, turn around and walk back home. When it was time, I'd walk back through the forest and meet him at the top of town and walk him back through the woods. This was a treat for me because I hadn't found work yet, and it felt great to have leisure time after years of hard graft. I grew up in Canada, but I raised my son in the UK, so we have completely different attitudes towards the wilderness. I know you can relate to this, Emma, because you've often questioned how Canadians can just hike around in bear country with a little spray bottle of repellent and a cowbell tied to their backpack. I didn't tell him that there was a horrible spot in the woods where I'd be overcome by a terrible fear every time I passed. I would be praying my heart out as I speed walked through that part each time. It was better on the legs of the trip where I was with my son. But my chest would tighten and I'd be full of dread, just like the stuff in the house. I didn't say anything, and neither did he. It felt so evil, not like a person near or a bear or even the weird feeling in the forest when there's a carcass of an animal nearby. All these things change the feeling and the sound of the woods, but this was an oozing malicious evil in that one area of the woods. In fact, I would have been able to point to where the feeling came from. It wasn't even on both sides of the path. It came from a specific place in the woods just beyond view. One day, I had walked my son through the forest and was on my way back when I came towards that spot. Braced myself, got my praying on, sparked up my speed walking, and as I passed the spot, the most horrible noise I have ever heard came from the woods. Now, this is proper Canadian West Coast woods, so you can't see 10 feet in when you're standing at the edge of it. The noise was multi-tonal. It had a screech or a squeal, like it was a screaming pig, alongside a deep-throated rolling bear growl sandwiched in between other tones, other voices, other screams. This would be where I listed all my forest animal call bona fides, but suffice to say, when I was young, I ran to the forest like it was my mother. I know the sounds of the woods. This wasn't an animal noise. I just hoofed it and prayed my guts out, speed walking down the path. When we moved away from there, I told my son about it, and he said he had a horrible feeling in that same spot of the woods. He said he got the feeling something terrible happened there. It was close to one of the car chassis, and he thought maybe it was related to that. We agreed that the woods were more cursed than haunted, and we were glad to be done with it. My son was a full-on weird kid, but it basically all went away as he got older, and I don't even know if he believes in anything anymore. But the weird years were great. Creepy, sure, but don't we all love that deep down inside? I bought this old 2-up, 2-down, old terraced house in Greater Manchester by scraping together all my savings and essentially buying one of the 2 houses for sale that were in that price point. So it was very run down and had been empty for years. It had been willed to the previous owner who never lived in it, and after many years he died and his wife finally put it up for sale. I didn't move any of our furniture over from the property we were trying to sell back in Wales. The property looked better, fully furnished, so I just brought some cushions and blankets to make up a bed for us on the floor in my room. My son was still very young, so he didn't mind sleeping with me for a while until we got everything sorted. So there we were on the floor of my bedroom, laying on cushions and blankets, feeling like we were camping, when my son said, "Oh look, there's an old man standing at the foot of the bed." He said this with the tone of voice that you'd use if you'd looked out the window and saw a little baby bird learning to fly. A genuine sweet little tone one uses to describe baby animals, or perhaps the breakfast served in bed on Mother's Day. That tone. Well, I just went off. I started saying, yelling, "It's our fucking house now, and we don't have some old man housemaid living for free under our roof. He's getting the fuck out, or he's paying rent. I'm not having some old man at the foot of my bed like a goddamn asshole watching me. And it went on like that for a while. The old man didn't show up again, but my son brought it up occasionally when I did something he considered hot-headed or a little rude. He'd say, "This is like that time that you sent the old man away." One thing that I was never able to explain was that he saw people made of different colours of light. They were human forms. They walked around his dad's house and just ignored the living. He said there was only one time where he thought only one of them looked at him directly. They were just standing or walking from one room to another. That's it. I just thought his dad's house was the problem. Until my son eventually told me the light beings would often stand on the roof of the tall building behind our house. He said they never came into the yard or the house, but they just stood on top of the building looking on. I didn't know what to think, other than my caustic personality was an anathema to all supernatural beings. I'm okay with that. When I moved abroad, I bought this old, run-down Victorian terrace B&B in a seaside town in Wales, and it was really haunted. I bought it from a set of ancient spinster twins who had been born in the hotel. Their parents owned and ran the hotel before passing it to them. They never married or lived anywhere else in their lives. I know the spirits of their parents, specifically their dad, would really menace me when I was working on the place. I think he had a problem with a woman doing construction work or changing things that he had done. But I would just shame him by pointing out what a completely shit job he did on maintenance and renovations, because he did. He did a shit job. As soon as I felt him standing over me, always blocking the doorway, I would start in on him. What the hell is this? Who puts down new carpet on top of old carpet? That's disgusting. Who would be that lazy? You didn't like me pulling it up, but if you did it right, I wouldn't have to redo all the crappy, lazy and cheap shit you did around here. Eventually, he gave up. Or maybe found a little respect for me. I don't know, but it got better over the years. The twins were in their 70s when I bought the hotel, so most of the renovations their father had done happened in the 1960s to the 1980s. And when the twins took over, I don't think they changed a thing. For example, there had never been a fitted kitchen or heating installed. When my sisters or my mom came to visit, they had terrifying experiences, but they're pretty badass. My mom was washing her face in her room and felt someone standing there watching her, and she just said, "It's rude to stand there watching a woman in her room." And the presence went away. My oldest sister was pinned against the wall by a spirit late at night in the kitchen. The time change gave her insomnia, and she spent the whole visit wandering the hotel through the night unable to sleep. When she went into the kitchen and was pinned to the wall, she just yelled something like, "Bring it the fuck on, you dead-ass piece of shit," or whatever came into her mind. It released instantly, and she was really pissed off about that. My other sister was laying on her back in bed in one of the hotel rooms, wide awake, when something grabbed her by the shoulders and pressed her down into the bed. She had the same response, telling it to fuck off as she threw punches into the air. But she did have a little cry about it the next day when she told me because, as she said, it just felt so mean. Guests would report different experiences, but the ones they reported most involved a ghost I often saw, but never talked to the guests about unless they mentioned it first. It was a little black cat. I would see it often, jumping down from the table, walking in the hall, sitting in the threshold. And this little black cat was the single most reported sighting. It was there when we moved in, and it just went about its business. There was another cat as well, and this one was well known to me because it was my dearly loved ginger kitty, who had died soon after moving to Wales, leaving me with one living orange kitty, Peter. I would think I was letting Peter out of the room, or I'd step around him in the hallway, and then I'd see Peter looking in the window from outside and realise I had been with my ghost kitty, not my living kitty. But he was as full-bodied and as real as you and me. It wasn't one of those out of the corner of my eye sightings which happen when you have an animal. Peter, my living cat, wasn't allowed on the top 3 stories of the hotel. There was a fire door to the stairs which kept him on the main level, plus fire doors to each room, all which close automatically. Sometimes when there were no guests, I'd let Peter come upstairs for a little treat, because cats love a little mooch around where they're not supposed to go. Once I was going upstairs with someone and we both stepped aside to let the cat through, holding the fire door open as we watched him, tail up, breeze past us to go first, as is a cat's prerogative. The cat went ahead of us into one of the bedrooms and the fire door automatically swung shut behind us. When it was time to leave, we both looked everywhere to get the cat out, and there was no cat in the room. We talked the whole incident through and agreed that there was, without a doubt, a kitty who elbowed his way to the front of the line to get through the fire door first. We agreed that the kitty entered through the second fire door with us into the guest room, and that there was no way for him to get out, nor was he now anywhere in the room. I saw my ghost kitty often enough, and it became easy to tell him from my living cat as it had been in life. They were both ginger but looked vastly different. The living one was small and creamy orange with white markings, and the one who passed was a huge dark orange beast of a cat. But I, of course, had been assuming any orange cat was my living cat, Peter, once he was the only living cat in the building. I was simply wrong. I still had 2 cats, plus the black one I inherited when I bought the hotel. When I sold the hotel, it was bought to be made into flats, and I told both cats to come with me. The black cat rubbed against my legs purring. I could hear it and I could feel it, but I couldn't see it, and I knew it was communicating that it would stay in its home. My cat made me feel like he was going to move on to wherever best cats go when they leave us. I didn't see my cat or the black cat again once I moved, even though my orange cat had followed me to the hotel from the place that he had died a few months before we moved into the hotel. Here's a nice one about my lovely dog. He was amazing. I got him from a house I had done renovations on where the dog's owner was sick in hospital and eventually died. The dog had been neglected during the man's illness and was pretty aggressive at the best of times, had bitten another dog, hated cats, etc. He was old and frail and his eyes were all milky. He had a terrible smoker's cough from the second-hand smoke from his chain-smoking human. The family was talking about putting the dog down, so I said I would take him home and give him a really good last few months. I had a chat with the dog in the car, explaining that he'd be living with 2 cats and that he had to be nice and he couldn't be an asshole with anyone anymore. Well, I thought I'd be nursing this dog for a few months, but you can guess what happened. He came home and perked right up and was not aggressive, decided he loved living with cats, played with little children, and was one of the joys in my life. In fact, that is how Peter the cat got his name. I took Peter on as a feral cat who lived abandoned in a basement with no human contact and just some plates of food left out for him. My friend was made aware of the situation and I told her that if she could catch him, I would take him in. Well, he was the wildest, most angry little person you've ever met. In fact, after months of trying and trips to the vet, which almost killed us both, I decided to let him go outside for the first time in his life. I thought, he hates people. Maybe he can find a happy little life being outside. I was desperate. I made a little house for him outside and caught him. He still hid in the ductwork and between the floors of my house. I put him outside and just cried about my failure. A few hours later, I looked outside and he was sitting, like a bodhisattva under a tree, with a contented, peaceful look on his lovely little face. And that was it. He was happy to come back in and happy to go back out. He was a different person and we became good friends. When I took him in, I was told his name was Zach. The dog I took in was named Max. Every time I called Zach, Max, the old deaf dog, would struggle to lift his 80-pound body off the floor to limp over to me on his stiff legs to see what I wanted, just to find out that I'd been calling the cat. To half-deaf Max, the name sounded the same. Just to watch the dog get up was painful, so I took Zach aside and told him, "Your name is Peter now, because Peter means stone, and you were like stone when you came here." I swear to you, he looked me right in the eyes and I knew he understood. It was so strange, it frightened me a little. To think that kind of connection in human language was possible. So when he walked away, I said, "Peter?" rather timidly in a quiet voice, and he turned around and walked back to me purposefully, as though he were trying to illustrate to me that he had indeed understood that he had a new name. He came to Peter after that, as though it had been his name all along. When my old dog Max died a few years later, I prayed for his passage to the next place, and saw a vision of him in my meditative state. He was trotting through the green wood towards a little cabin. I knew those woods so well and thought, yeah, his heaven would be in the greenwood, the place that I called one of my mothers, the place we all took long walks together in his second life with me. In the vision, waiting for him at the door of the cabin, stood his previous owner who had died, and I thought, of course he had been here, though I had forgotten Max had another life before our life together. Standing next to this man was another man I'd never seen before. He had a strikingly unique appearance. He was tall, much younger than Max's previous human, with long straggly hair, an army surplus jacket and jeans. I didn't understand why he was there, but I just sent loads of love and said goodbye. My dog only came to me once after he died, and I just drew in a breath and started begging him to forgive me and to say I was sorry for not taking better care of him or not trying more things to get him well. Basically, all of the guilt feelings after having a beloved sick pet euthanized. But before I could say a word to him, he just sent the words, "thank you," into my mind. I was so surprised he was grateful to me. I had been beating myself up and felt so horrible that I had blinded myself to how close we were, how much love and joy we shared during the last 2 years of his life, our time together. A few years after that, I was talking to the daughter of my dog's previous human. I was asking about her family, and she started talking about her nephew. Her sister had a child from an on-off relationship with a man who struggled with alcohol abuse, just like their own father had struggled with. The nephew's father had gotten sober, but had died of hypothermia on a park bench while in some extended meditation session he had started doing as part of his sobriety practice. I never met him, or his son either. She was talking about her nephew's father, and at the end she started to laugh a little, shaking her head slowly, saying that she could still picture him perfectly because he had such a distinct look. He was tall, with long straggly hair, always wore jeans and this old army surplus jacket. It took years, but I finally found out who the second person was, there at the cabin door ready to greet Max. It made sense because they'd both struggled with alcoholism, and I bet when you go to the next place there's lots of healing to do around that, and my hope is that they help each other to get the healing they so needed. I want to tell you that my dog's smoker's cough was horrible. It really was a 3-pack-a-day cough, with that little gagging noise at the end. It was so dramatic that my cat, the one who passed in the previous story, became intrigued. It wasn't long before the cat noticed that I would jump up and make sure the dog was okay every time he made that noise. Eventually I was able to ignore it, as the vet said there wasn't anything we could do about it. But in those early days, my cat, taking notes about the attention on offer for making horrible throat noises, started making his own variation of the smoker's cough. He kept it up until the dog passed on, at which point he retired it, and I'd like to think that it was out of respect for the dog. I was given a St. Anthony's religious medal from my friend and I really liked it. I didn't pay too much attention to the St. Anthony side, but would often look at the prayer on the other side, which I now know is the brief or letter of St. Anthony. I didn't know who St. Anthony was. Even though I'm a Catholic, it wasn't one of the saints we learned about in Catholic school in Canada. Anyway, I kept the medal around to look at and never really put it away. I still didn't feel any curiosity about St. Anthony. So here's my introduction to St. Anthony, and it's pretty weird. I'd lost my wedding ring. I couldn't wear it for long stretches because it really gave me dermatitis. This means that I would take it off frequently and occasionally lose it for a few days at a time. But one day it was gone and it stayed gone. I suppose it was missing for somewhere between 6 months and a year. So one day I pulled out my childhood jewellery box full of things I hadn't worn for years. It contained a bunch of very thin chains, gold and silver, different lengths. This was a common gift when I was growing up. A chain with some kind of pendant, or let's be honest, cross. The chains were tangled and it was very disorganised. I decided to dump it all out onto the bathroom carpet so it could be contained and nothing could roll away as I dumped it. It turned out not to be a great idea since everything kind of disappeared into the deep pile of the bath rug, and then the phone rang. I left it all there and went to answer the phone. It was landline days. I probably forgot what I was doing and it was some time later when I went up to the bathroom again. All the jewellery was piled into a high, pointed pyramid shape, and my wedding ring was poised, balancing on top of the pile. I honestly couldn't have arranged the jewellery like that if I tried. It was crazy. It was a very different configuration than when I left the room, and I would have never put my wedding ring into that old box. I wouldn't even have thought about it as an option. Lastly, I was alone at home. A little while after this, I found a little booklet about St. Anthony and read that he was the patron saint of lost objects, and the penny dropped. I read some very miraculous stories about how he especially helped to find wedding rings, but I would find out that he also helped to find other things as well. When I was in my 20s, I walked into work and my workmate was standing at the back of the shop with her handbag dumped out onto the counter and her wallet laying open. Both had their lining torn, and she had a horrible look on her face. She explained that they were leaving for their holiday that afternoon. They booked flights, hotel and the rental car in advance. She was the only one with a driving licence and she couldn't find it anywhere. This was particularly bad because they had to drive the rental car a considerable distance to their destination as soon as they arrived at their destination airport. She tore the linings out, thinking maybe it had somehow slipped in there. She had everything out. She'd been looking through it for ages already, and I put my fresh eyes on it and went through it again. She'd given up hope. I said we should pray to St. Anthony. She said there's no point praying because it just wasn't there. I said St. Anthony does miracles and told her the ring story and explained what I'd read in the pamphlet. So we closed the wallet and prayed a little prayer to St. Anthony to please find her driving licence. You won't believe this, but we opened the wallet and the licence was in it. I'm not kidding. I've had wallets that have a million little places to slide cards, and also wallets where things can slip up or down in compartments as the wallet wears out. That's why it's important to say that it appeared in the little change purse compartment that had one of those twist closures, 2 metal toggles that turn past each other as a latch. So yeah, it was like St. Anthony knew that although we were 2 Catholic girls praying, we'd be looking for a way to convince ourselves that it wasn't a miracle. One more St. Anthony. I was visiting my oldest sister who very aggressively doesn't believe in anything, and you'll get a tut and an eye roll if you dare say anything religious. Anyway, she had lost her wedding ring and I told her to pray to St. Anthony to get it back. I told her about my experiences and she gave me a tut and an eye roll and told me to pray to him if I wanted. I said a little prayer, quietly to myself where she'd probably kick me out. Later that day she went to use the washroom, and as she sat there the shower curtain rod flew off and almost gave her a heart attack. It had never fallen before, and there was seemingly no reason for it to do so. My sister grabbed the rod with the curtain still attached and stood on the edge of the bathtub to put it back. That's when she heard a voice in her head that said, "Turn around." So standing there, balancing on the edge of the bathtub, holding this curtain rod and curtain, she pivots at her waist, putting her face right about eye level with the top of the medicine cabinet. And yeah, you guessed it, her wedding ring was sitting there on top of the medicine cabinet. Now, she refused to believe it was St. Anthony, and instead insisted she must have, for some unknown reason, just this one time, stood on her tiptoes, stretching her arm up as high as possible, and pretty much tossed her ring up there and then forgot about it. This was an old school medicine cabinet, with large mirrored sliding doors, which reached almost to the ceiling. So yeah, figure that one out. There are loads of other fantastic St. Anthony stories, but they could all be explained away individually, as when you find something that's been missing, it just seems obvious to someone listening to the story and really not miraculous. I just wanted to give you the top 3 because the story you'd need to concoct to explain an alternative theory would end up being stranger than just accepting that for whatever reason, St. Anthony likes to help find stuff if you ask him. And I'm okay with that. Last thing, I want to throw my hat into the theory ring. Basically, Emma, I'm talking about the encounters you read out and then punctuate with, quite rightly, I mean, come on, if you were an alien and came all the way here with your advanced technology, why are you looking around looking like a mime in bright red lipstick or like some creepy kid demanding to be let in a car on a deserted road? It makes no sense, right? Why not come up with a better shtick? If you can magic a child's physical form, why stop at the sclera? Why? Okay, here's my theory. I think that black-eyed children are mighty good at masking, but some can see through it. Maybe to different extents, and maybe just once in a while. It's similar to how people react to psychopaths. One woman sees through the act and is repulsed, while another is drawn into the illusion. I think some people can see and hear these entities in a way that is much closer to their actual form. I believe the rest of us see them and hear them as they've designed themselves to appear. For example, I bet if I saw a black-eyed kid, I would not cotton on at all. I'd see a regular kid. And furthermore, rather than hearing their actual intent, "Let me in now," I would hear whatever would convince me to let them into the car. I think they can just get in our heads and we end up telling ourselves what we need to hear and what we need to see to do what they want. So I would totally let a kid in my car if they had regular eyeballs and said they were lost and cold or basically anything except, let me in your car. I want to come into your car now. There are many stories of entities getting in our heads and showing us what they want us to see. And there are many stories of people hearing things in their head, right? So I think these entities are really good at just doing what they want. And because most of us are really permeable, impressionable, and maybe a little bit unconscious, the entities can just pass as people and manipulate our thoughts with minimum effort. I think this is probably true in almost all cases. I don't even think they need to put thoughts in our heads so we can make sense of events. I think they can just make us generate our own sense-making stories. Because different people will let kids in their car for different reasons at different times. But at any time, there might always be at least one reason you would. A reason maybe only known to your subconscious. But there are exceptions to the rule. And those few people in those few moments where their own internal system for sense-making and reality generating just kind of goes offline and they're able to catch a glimpse of the real entity and to hear and feel its real intent. Thank you, Sybil, for taking the time to write down all of your stories, because I know that obviously that was a huge amount of effort. And, you know, to everybody who takes the time to actually write down your stories and send them in, it's incredibly exposing to do that. And I totally understand how incredibly exposing it is. And it must feel to be like, oh, I'm going to write down all these strange things that have happened to me over the years. And there's always the risk that people aren't going to believe it, etc., etc. But I appreciate it when people take the time to write down stories and send them in. You know, no matter how long, no matter how short. Right, and going back to the beginning, Sybil, we were talking about angel numbers. Now, I actually don't know anything about angel numbers, but I do know that in the world of tattoos, angel numbers are a very popular tattoo with Gen Z. And I do think they look really cool, but I don't have an angel number, so I don't have an angel number tattooed on me. But apparently, according to numerology.com, all the different angel numbers have different meanings. So, for example, you mentioned seeing 333 all the time and being like, go and annoy my ma, because I don't want to deal with it. Apparently, if you keep seeing 333, you are being called to recognize your life purpose. You were born into this world with unique talents and abilities that have the power to make an impact on everyone and everything around you, but you may not be using them to their full potential. Believe it or not, you've slowly but surely been developing your soul mission all along, and this sequence is telling you that you are more than ready to tap on it. The meaning behind the 333 angel number is that you shouldn't let doubt stop you from moving forward. You've got the universe on your side. Now, just to say as well, I have absolutely no idea like who decides what these numbers mean, okay? Just to be clear, I don't know who's deciding these, but we're just going to go along with it for now. 444. If you see that angel number, it indicates you're on the right path, even if you don't know it yet. You may be feeling as though you've been pushing a huge boulder uphill with no end in sight. This number is your sign not to give up and to keep your eye on the prize. Your spirit guides are right next to you when you see these numbers, cheering you along your path, helping you to get to the finish line. Trust that everything happens in its own divine time and your guardian angel is on your side. The 444 angel number is telling you that you will come out the other side of this, so just keep going. And finally, 1111, which was your sister's number, I believe. So the number 1 is associated with beginnings, initiative and independence. So if you're seeing the 4 ones angel number, you could be entering a new phase of your life or embarking upon a new journey of some kind. Now is not the time to dwell on the past or lament about missteps that you may have made, nor is it the time to be shy about your biggest hopes and dreams. The 1111 angel number is letting you know that opportunities, growth and positive change could be on your horizon. So be open to the possibilities that make themselves available to you now. So interesting. Like, I don't know who decides about numerology and what things mean, but I do know that people do pay a lot of attention to numerology. And it's interesting because I never notice anything about numbers. Like, I never notice, I never look at my phone and be like, oh my God, it's 1111 or whatever. That's weird. Like, I never see them. So maybe my guardian angels, if they exist, aren't speaking to me in that way. And now listen, right, we need to talk about your ma, because she's fucking cool, man. Like, what a woman. 2 unseen men scrapping in her bedroom And then your dad's voice is like, go and see her. And it's an ex-boyfriend who's still hearting after her. Oh, I love it. And your ma's just like, whatever, I'm not interested in you. Leave me alone. And he gives up. Please. We need your mom's energy both to deal with ghosts and I would say to deal with unwanted attention from potential suitors in real life. And I think it's a real powerful thing to do. Like, obviously, you then went on to live in that house and kind of wondered if maybe your mum's energy kept everything at bay. You know what I mean? When she was there, because she was like, oh, like, just leave me alone. Like, I'm not arsed with any of this. And I kind of adopted that stance with stuff that was going on in my own house. And you know what? I do think it makes a difference. I think there's something about feeding into the energy of a haunting and that fear feeding the energy, whether it's like literally psychologically or supernaturally. And sorry, I'm still stuck on your ma. Imagine being that much of a babe that even in the afterlife fellas are fighting over you. Oh, what a woman, honestly. And it's really interesting that you said, you know, on a more serious note, that you felt like there was a land energy that seeped into the house while the house was vacant. And then in your next story, you talk about like sensing this great evil on the forest path. Like I often wonder with stories like that, whether or not it's to do with like elemental energies, right? Old energies that exist in the forests that maybe are not good as we know it in terms of nature. Maybe they're probably quite neutral. Like, you know, naturally earthquakes happen, floods happen, hurricanes happen, and in terms of nature it's quite neutral. It's just a thing that happens, but it's incredibly destructive and dark and all of those things. And I often wonder if that's the same thing with these entities that people feel out in the forest, and this kind of multi-tonal scream that you described. And when you grow up in the country, like I grew up in the countryside, so when people say to me, you know, that thing that you heard, it was probably just a vixen, it was a fox, and I'm like, oh, do you think I've never heard a fox before? You know, when you grow up in the countryside, you do hear lots of things, and you know when something isn't natural to that area. You just know it. And I do love the fact that your son was a creepy kid and you just accepted that. I think that's really important, I think, to do when your kids are weird and spooky, that you just kind of go, okay, you're weird and spooky, and not to try and like suppress that weird spookiness, just to go, okay, we're going to make the old man go away because we're not doing this. I agree. If you are going to be haunting my house, you are paying rent. Okay. If you've got time to be house haunting, you've got time to be doing bits and pieces around the house that's maybe more helpful. You've got time to be paying rent in some way, shape or form. And I think there's something probably really powerful about speaking directly to spirits and saying, hey, I don't want this. I don't want you here. I'm not happy with this. Please leave me alone. There is something really powerful about that. And I can only assume that your son has sort of grown out of seeing these entities and spirits and light people and whatever, because, you know, as we know from these stories, kids often do. And I am moving through these stories chronologically, so if it feels like I'm jumping around, I'm really sorry. But I just also wanted to say that I adore the women in your family. They are all kick-ass. Pinned to the kitchen wall, swear at it. Pressed into the bed, punch it. Brilliant. Love it. Your ma's like, don't be in my room watching me. It's freaky. It's weird. Get out. Love it. You're like, why are you standing over me watching the things that I do when you did them wrong in the first place? Your workmanship was shit. It's not my fault. I just love it. This is how we need to be dealing with ghosts going forward, right? You got an unwanted ghost. You pull out your best quarrelsome dame attitude and absolutely lay into them. And there is actually genuinely nothing more that I love than little cat spirits knocking around. Oh, it brings me such joy. Honestly, it's the sweetest thing to think that little black cat was knocking around. Lots of people saw him. And then you have your ginger cat that stayed around. And our pet hauntings, they're always non-threatening. They're not turning the lights on and off. You know what I mean? They're just jumping onto the bed and curling up, or they're slinking around doorways. They're not doing anything bad. And I just love that. I would like to say that the fact that your cat mimicked the cough of the dog because it got him attention is absolutely genius. I realised when I got Hades was walking around with a limp, and I obviously took him to the vet, and the vet was like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with his leg. There is no bone injury, there's no muscle injury, nothing. And I realised that Hades would limp when he was hungry because he had lived on the streets, and he obviously believed that if he limped, there would be more of a chance of him getting food, which is honestly very, very clever. And it does sound like you've been the taker-inner of lots of kind of lost animals in various shapes and sizes. And I'm fairly sure that will get you your place in heaven, or whatever place it is that we go to after we die. And in regards to your St. Anthony, like I don't know, I don't care what people say. I'm a firm believer in St. Anthony and St. Anthony's ability to find lost things. Like, I have spent my life growing up and praying to St. Anthony. Now, I will say St. Anthony never did find my wedding ring. So I would appreciate it if, St. Anthony is playing the long game maybe, or doing a serious search. But I would like my wedding ring back. That'd be great. And I know loads of people who have crazy stories about St. Anthony and finding things. And look, maybe it's just because maybe it's like that sort of, what do they call it? Like a positivity bias. I can't even remember what the word is, but you know what I mean, where you find it and then you associate it with saying the prayer to St. Anthony, but you would have found it anyway. But it, those stories are weird. That's not just like I prayed to St. Anthony and then I found the thing under the table or whatever. That's like it was in the wallet that we had searched through a bazillion times. The ring was on top of the cabinet where there's absolutely no reason why it would be put there. And as for your black-eyed children theory, do you know what? It's a bloody good theory. Because we've spoken about this before. Like, why are people letting them in? We get these stories about black-eyed children. We don't know what happens after people let them in, but we know that they're knocking around. Do I sort of think it's an urban legend as well? Kind of. But I also know that we've had stories in before from people who've been like, I experienced a really strange person with like black eyes or whatever, or they just had a vibe. Maybe it's just the ability that some people have the ability to see these people differently. Like that's a really good theory. I'm here for it. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you to Sybil for sending in your stories. Remember, if you would like to send in your stories, you can do so by emailing them to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or for $2 a month, you can get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
Busy work weeks can leave you feeling drained. Prolon's 5-day fasting mimicking diet works at the cellular level to rejuvenate you from the inside out, providing real results that include fat-focused, sustainable weight loss with no injection needed. Next Gen builds on the original Prolon with 100% organic soups and teas, a richer taste, and ready-to-eat meals. Developed at USC's Longevity Institute and backed by top medical centers, Prolon supports biological age reduction, metabolic health, skin appearance, fat loss, and energy. Get 15% off plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe at prolonlife.com/start. That's prolonlife.com/start.